All righty, here we go. So I'm going to get this video out of the way because I think it's interesting to point out and to see kind of the shifting narratives that have occurred. Okay. Y'all see the title, little baity, but I'm sure I'll attract some folks that will troll me a little bit. It's okay. It's all right. But I want to talk about, the sort of the new African support and of the Japanese during the Second World War, and even a little bit before that. This comes from the idea that black folks saw themselves as Asiatic. Now I got to read through this Malcolm X book, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention. I got to read through parts of this again. But I remember the first degree. Now this comes from the Five Percenters, the offshoot of the Nation of Islam, where they said, who is the original man? The original man is the Asiatic black man, cream of the universe. So there's this idea, and I think even Malcolm X, even after the Second World War, did promote this idea as well. But the idea that melanated people, I'm going to use this term just so I don't, get things confused, but melanated people and Asians have a connection. Now, of course, this kind of evolved in the kind of Afrocentric way that actually it's like, well, black folks were the original samurais and stuff like that, I take that all with a grain of salt, a big old grain of salt, But anywho, there was actual defense, at least in name only, not in any actual financial support, but there was support for the Japanese Empire because they saw them as liberating European, basically they're fighting the European powers, so they're our allies. That's basically it. But you have to remember, even in the early days of the Nation of Islam, which was started on July 4th, 1930, there were Japanese nationalists who did reach out to the Nation of Islam to give them support. So, like I said, this is something that I think a lot of folks don't talk about, and it kind of disappeared because now, of course, a lot of the hate, ironically, coming to Asians comes from melanated people. Now, that's not to say white folks do it too. Yeah, white folks do it too. Absolutely. Honkies do it too. Us degenerated Europeans or whatever you want to say. But there is history of it, I'll give this, even people like W.E.B. Du Bois, who himself did not get involved and, distanced himself a lot from Marcus Garvey and the UNIA. He said, let me see here, NAACP and the crisis. Okay, World War II. Here we go. Du Bois opposed the U.S. intervention in World War II, particularly in the Pacific, because he believed that China and Japan were emerging from the clutches of white imperialists. He felt that the European allies waging war against Japan was an opportunity for whites to reestablish their influence in Asia. He was deeply disappointed by the U.S. government's plan for African Americans in the armed forces. Blacks were limited to 5.8% of the force, and there were no African American combat units, virtually the same restrictions as in World War I. With blacks threatening to shift their support to President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Republican opponent in the 1940 election, Roosevelt appointed a few blacks to leadership posts in the military. Dusk of Dawn, Du Bois's second autobiography, was published in 1940. The title refers to his hope that African Americans were passing out the darkness of racism into an era of greater equality. The work is part autobiography, part history, and part sociological treatise. Du Bois described the book as the autobiography of a concept of race, elucidated and magnified, and doubtless distorted in the thoughts and deeds which were mine. Thus, for all my life is significant for all lives of men. 1943, age 75, Du Bois was abruptly fired from his position at Atlanta University by college president Rufus Clement. Many scholars expressed outrage, prompting Atlanta University to provide Du Bois with a lifelong pension and the title Professor Emeritus. Arthur Spingarn remarked that Du Bois spent his time at Atlanta battering his life out against ignorance, bigotry, intolerance, and slothfulness, projecting ideas nobody but he understands, and raising hopes for change which may be comprehended. Okay, so basically, yeah, they kind of skip over it, but this is something that's fairly common, at least in this time, the 1940s. And I'm reading it a little bit further in this Malcolm X biography, A Life of Reinvention, which, as I've said before, a lot of people don't like, and they don't make Malcolm X look like this great revolutionary as he was. There are mistakes. Like I say, I don't claim that this book is perfect, but I like the fact that it tries to demystify the autobiography of Malcolm X, because I think it's important to question these things. And to be honest with you, I haven't read autobiography, so maybe when I read this, I can get more of a clearer picture. I don't know. Anywho, I think it's interesting to note, of course, there are a lot of folks who are like, why would I want to fight this white man's war in the Second World War? And so there was this shift, obviously, and there's a lot of folks who, just as the Vietnam War did, a lot of folks ran away to Canada. A lot of folks, they just said that they're mentally unfit. People like Malcolm X went in there basically and made himself look crazier than he was, so that he was declared mentally unfit. But yeah, there's a lot of that occurred. I think it's interesting, of course, to see where this shift happened. And I think, and I would say probably the 1960s, 1970s is when that change occurred. Maybe even as early as the 1990s. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's a lot of assumptions, but it really came about when you saw, particularly in Los Angeles, and you also saw in Brooklyn, the amount of Asian grocery stores that started to spring up. A lot of the Koreans, in particular, didn't really care for melanated people. I'm gonna stick with that term. Sorry, from going into their shops. And so basically, like I said, this is kind of like the sort of LARPy idea that, pan-Europeanism, where it's like, yeah, bro, the Germans and the French, they'll all get along. It's like, no, man, they've been fighting for centuries. Come on. This is the same type of LARPy idea, where it's just like, yeah, we call ourselves Asiatic, so we're going to get along with the Japanese and get along with the Chinese and all that. Even if, people like W.E.B. Du Bois do not talk about it in specific terms, they're very, like I say, they had that support, and they had this idea where it's just like, well, we need to, we just need to be against the United States, this and that. So, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's wild to think about with folks. Yeah, I just wanted to put this out. And of course, like I say, particularly, the 1992 LA riots, and the rooftop Koreans and all that sort of thing that occurred. I imagine, that was kind of the showing that this imagined solidarity between, melanated people and, whether it's Koreans or Chinese or Japanese, that support isn't there. That's the whole thing, They're trying to rebuild that, but I think it's artificial now, particularly with the rising of anti-Asian attacks across the United States. And this sort of, we just need to fight white supremacy. I don't think it's real, though. I really don't. This sort of, it's a fake solidarity. People will talk about, Asians being the model minority and all this sort of thing. I know lefties, but it's like, I think that, like I say, a lot of the Chinese folks have a loyalty to China now, partly because it's rising up and it's a bigger country and bigger economy than the U.S. So they, like I say, I think they're pragmatic more than being nationalistic. At least that's my opinion. I don't know. Say what you will, but yeah. Anywho, I hope y'all glean some things from that. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. See you later, and goodbye.